Tonight, I want to teach you something that Carl Jung understood deeply. Something that could change how you experience your relationships, your peace of mind, and your sense of self. It's simple to say, but profound in its implications. Don't think too much about anyone, not your parents, not your partner, not your ex, not your children, not your friends. Not the person who hurt you, not the person you're trying to impress, not anyone. And I know that sounds strange at first, maybe even cold, because we've been taught that caring about people means thinking about them constantly. That love means holding someone in your thoughts. That connection requires constant mental attention to the other person. But Jung would tell you something different. He would tell you that when you think too much about anyone, when someone occupies too much space in your mind, you're not actually connecting with them. You're doing something else entirely. You're projecting, you're losing yourself, you're giving your power away. And tonight, as you lie here in the quiet, I want to help you understand what Jung meant by this, because understanding it could set you free from patterns that have been exhausting you for years. Patterns of obsessive thinking, rumination, mental loops that never resolve, relationships that live more in your head than in reality. Let's start with what actually happens when you think too much about someone. When you find yourself constantly thinking about another person, constantly wondering what they think of you, constantly replaying conversations, constantly imagining future interactions, constantly trying to figure them out, you're not engaged in genuine relationship. You're engaged in something Jung called projection. Projection is when you take something from your own psyche and place it onto another person. You take your own feelings, your own fears, your own desires, your own shadow, and you experience them as if they belong to the other person, or as if they're about the other person when they're actually about you. So when you're lying awake at night thinking about someone, trying to understand them, trying to figure out what they meant when they said that thing, trying to decode their behavior, trying to predict what they'll do next, you're not actually thinking about them. You're thinking about your projection of them. You're thinking about the version of them that exists in your mind. The story you've created about who they are, what they want, what they think of you, what they're capable of. And that story, Jung would say, that story is more about you than it is about them. This is crucial to understand. The person in your mind is not the actual person. The person in your mind is your construction, your projection, your interpretation. And the more you think about them, the more elaborate that construction becomes, and the further you get from reality. Jung spent decades helping people understand this, that we don't actually encounter other people directly. We encounter our projections of them. We encounter the images we've created, the stories we've told ourselves, the meanings we've assigned to their words and actions. And those projections, those mental constructions, they tell us far more about our own psyche than they do about the other person. When you can't stop thinking about someone, ask yourself, what am I projecting onto them? What part of myself am I seeing in them, or wanting from them, or afraid of in them? What does my obsessive thinking about this person reveal about me? Because here's what Jung understood. The energy you spend thinking about other people is energy that's not available for your own life. It's psychic energy that's been redirected outward, invested in someone else, tied up in trying to understand or control or predict or win over another person. And that energy needs to come back to you. It needs to be withdrawn from the other person and redirected toward your own becoming, toward your own individuation, toward discovering who you are when you're not constantly oriented toward someone else. This is especially important if you're someone who's always been focused on other people. If you grew up learning to monitor other people's moods, if you learned to manage other people's emotions, if you learned that your job was to figure out what everyone else needed and make sure they got it, if that's you, then thinking too much about others isn't just a habit. It's a survival strategy that you developed when you were young. It was how you stayed safe, how you earned love, how you maintained connection. You learned to focus all your attention outward because focusing inward wasn't safe or wasn't allowed or wasn't valued. But now, as an adult, that strategy isn't serving you anymore. Now it's just depleting you. It's keeping you from knowing yourself. It's keeping you oriented toward others in a way that prevents you from ever really coming home to yourself. Jung would say you're living in participation mystique. That's his term for a state where you're so merged with another person psychologically that you can't tell where you end and they begin. You're so focused on them that you've lost your boundaries. You've lost your sense of self as separate. And when you're in participation mystique with someone, when you're thinking about them constantly, you're not actually in relationship with them. You're enmeshed with them. You're entangled with them. And that's not healthy connection. That's loss of self. Real relationship, Jung would say, requires differentiation. It requires that you know who you are, separate from the other person. It requires that you have your own inner life, your own center, your own sense of self that doesn't depend on what they think or how they feel or whether they approve of you. But you can't develop that differentiated self if you're constantly thinking about them. If all your mental energy is going toward them, trying to understand them, trying to predict them, trying to manage your relationship with them, you have to pull that energy back. You have to stop thinking about them so much, not because you don't care, but because caring about someone doesn't require obsessive thinking. In fact, obsessive thinking gets in the way of real caring. Real caring happens when you can see the other person clearly, without projection. When you can be present with them without needing them to be anything other than what they are. When you can love them without losing yourself in them. But that kind of relating only becomes possible when you've done the work of withdrawing your projections. When you've stopped making them the center of your mental universe. When you've redirected your attention back to yourself. And I know that feels counterintuitive. It feels like if you stop thinking about someone, you'll lose connection with them. It feels like constant mental focus is what maintains the relationship. But Jung would tell you the opposite is true. The more you think about someone, the less you actually see them. The more elaborate your mental construction of them becomes, the further you are from knowing who they actually are. The more you project onto them, the more you're in relationship with your own psyche rather than with them. So tonight, as you begin to let yourself rest, I want you to consider the possibility that thinking less about others might actually improve your relationships. That withdrawing some of that obsessive mental focus might create space for real connection. Because when you stop thinking about someone constantly, when you stop trying to figure them out or manage them or predict them, something shifts. You become more present. You become more available to actually see them when you're with them, instead of being caught up in your thoughts about them. You also become more available to yourself. All that energy that was going outward comes back, and suddenly you have attention for your own inner life, your own feelings, your own needs, your own journey. This is what Jung meant by individuation. It's the process of becoming yourself, of developing your own center, of learning to live from the inside out instead of being constantly reactive to what's happening outside, to what other people are doing or thinking or feeling. And individuation requires that you stop giving so much of your mental energy to other people. It requires that you become more interested in yourself than you are in figuring everyone else out. Now, I want to be clear about something. This doesn't mean you become cold or detached or uncaring. It doesn't mean you stop loving people or stop being in relationship. It means you learn to relate differently. You learn to be with people without merging with them. You learn to care about them without making them the center of your psyche. You learn to love them while maintaining your own separate sense of self. And paradoxically, this makes you more capable of real intimacy. Because real intimacy isn't about merging or losing yourself in the other. It's about two whole people meeting, two differentiated individuals choosing to be together without either one losing themselves in the process. But most of us were never taught how to do that. We were taught that love means constant focus on the other, That caring means thinking about them all the time. That connection requires making them the most important thing in your life. And for some people, especially people who didn't receive consistent love when they were young, thinking about others becomes a way of trying to control the relationship. If I think about them enough, if I figure them out, if I can predict what they need, then maybe they'll stay, maybe they'll love me, maybe I'll be safe. But Jung would tell you that safety doesn't come from controlling others through constant mental focus. Safety comes from developing a strong enough sense of self that you can handle whatever happens in your relationships. That you can be okay even if someone leaves or disappoints you or doesn't give you what you hoped for. And you can't develop that kind of internal security while you're giving all your power away to thoughts about other people. You have to bring your focus back to yourself. You have to learn to think about yourself as much as you think about them. What do I need right now? What do I feel? What do I want? What's true for me in this moment? These are the questions that matter. These are the questions that help you know yourself. These are the questions that build your center. But if you're always thinking about someone else, you never get to these questions. You're always oriented outward. Always trying to read someone else. Always trying to manage someone else's experience of you. And that's exhausting. That's depleting. That's a way of living that keeps you from ever really inhabiting your own life. So tonight, as part of letting yourself rest, I want to invite you to practice something. Practice noticing when your mind goes to someone else. When you start thinking about them, wondering about them, trying to figure them out, and when you notice it, just gently redirect your attention, not with judgment, not with harshness. Just a gentle, oh, there I go again, thinking about them. And then bring your attention back to yourself, back to your breath, back to your body, back to this moment. This is a practice. It's not something you do once and you're done. It's something you do over and over, noticing, redirecting, noticing, redirecting. Over time, this practice changes your relationship with your own mind. You start to see how much energy you've been giving to thoughts about others. You start to notice the patterns, the specific people you think about most, the situations that trigger obsessive thinking, the stories you tell yourself about what other people think of you. And as you see it more clearly, you become less controlled by it. You develop more choice. You can choose to redirect your attention instead of being pulled into the mental loop. Jung called this consciousness, becoming aware of your patterns, so you're not just living them out unconsciously. And consciousness, he believed, is the beginning of freedom. Freedom from the patterns that have been running you. Freedom from the obsessive thoughts that have been exhausting you. Freedom from the constant orientation toward others that's been preventing you from knowing yourself. This freedom doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with understanding what Jung understood. That thinking too much about anyone is not love. It's not connection. It's projection. It's loss of self. It's giving your power away. And you can choose differently. You can choose to think less about them and more about yourself. You can choose to withdraw your projections. You can choose to come back to your own center. This is the work, and it's worth doing. Because on the other side of this work is a version of you that's more present, more grounded, more capable of real relationship, because you're not losing yourself in the process. Tonight, just start with noticing. Notice how much you think about other people. Notice the quality of those thoughts. Notice what it feels like in your body when you're caught in obsessive thinking about someone, and then practice coming back. Back to yourself, back to your breath, back to this moment right here. You don't have to solve anything tonight. You don't have to figure anyone out. You just have to be here with yourself. That's enough. That's the beginning. And from this beginning, everything can change. Let yourself rest now. Let your mind start to quiet. Let yourself notice if thoughts about someone else arise, and gently, kindly, bring your attention back to your own experience. You're here, you're breathing, you're alive. And that's what matters right now. Not what they think, not what they're doing, not what they meant. Just you, just here, just now. This is where your power lives, in this moment. In your own awareness, in your own presence with yourself. Jung understood this, and now you're beginning to understand it too. Just rest, just breathe, just be with yourself for now. Everything else can wait. There's something else Jung understood about why we think too much about other people. He understood that it's often not about the other person at all. It's about what we're avoiding in ourselves. When your mind is full of thoughts about someone else, when you're constantly analyzing them, or worrying about them, or replaying interactions with them, part of what's happening is that you're using those thoughts to avoid something else, something inside you that needs attention but feels too uncomfortable to face. Maybe it's your own loneliness. Maybe it's your own fear. Maybe it's your own grief, or anger, or shame. Maybe it's the question of who you are and what you want from your life. Maybe it's the emptiness you'd feel if you stopped filling your mind with thoughts about others. Jung would say that obsessive thinking about other people is often a defense mechanism. It's a way of staying distracted from your own inner work. Because as long as you're focused on them, you don't have to focus on you. As long as you're trying to figure them out, you don't have to figure yourself out. And this is important to understand with compassion, not judgment. You're not doing this because you're weak or foolish. You're doing it because at some point, probably when you were young, you learned that focusing on yourself wasn't safe, or wasn't valued, or brought pain. Maybe when you expressed your needs, you were dismissed or punished. Maybe when you showed your feelings, you were told you were too sensitive. Maybe when you tried to assert yourself, you were made to feel selfish, so you learned to focus on others instead. You learned to make yourself useful by understanding them, managing them, accommodating them. And now, even though you're an adult, even though the original situation is long past, the pattern persists. Your mind automatically goes to others. You automatically think about what they need, what they think, what they want, and you rarely turn that same level of attention toward yourself. Jung would say this is a splitting off from the self. The self, in his understanding, is your true nature, your authentic being, the part of you that knows what you need and want and feel. But when you're constantly focused on others, you lose contact with the self. You live from the outside in instead of from the inside out. And living from the outside in means you're always reactive. You're always responding to what others are doing or saying or thinking. You're always adjusting yourself based on them. Your mood depends on their mood. Your peace depends on their approval. Your sense of worth depends on how they treat you. This is an unstable way to live. Because you can't control other people. You can think about them constantly. You can try to understand them perfectly. You can attempt to predict their every move. And still, they're going to do what they do. They're going to be who they are. And you're going to be left trying to manage something that was never yours to manage. Jung would ask you to consider what would happen if you stopped. If you stopped trying to figure them out. If you stopped obsessing over what they meant, or what they think, or what they're going to do next. What would be left? For many people, the answer is uncomfortable. What would be left is the self you've been avoiding. The feelings you've been running from, the questions you've been afraid to ask, the emptiness, or the grief, or the anger, or the loneliness that thinking about others has been covering up, and that's hard. That's why the pattern is so persistent, because facing yourself, facing your own inner reality, without the distraction of obsessive thoughts about others, that takes courage. It requires you to be with discomfort. It requires you to feel what you've been avoiding. But Jung believed this is the only path to real freedom. You can't be free while you're giving your power away to thoughts about other people. You can only be free when you're willing to turn toward yourself, to be with yourself, to face what's actually there inside you. And what's there isn't as scary as you think. What's there is just you, your feelings, your needs, your desires, your fears, your humanity, all the parts of yourself that you've been taught to keep hidden or manage or suppress. When you stop thinking so much about others and start paying attention to yourself, you begin to discover who you actually are, not who you think you should be, not who others want you to be, but who you actually are beneath all the conditioning and performance and people-pleasing. This is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming yourself, of differentiating from the collective, from your family, from the expectations and projections that have been placed on you, of learning to live from your own center instead of being pulled in every direction by your thoughts about others. And individuation requires that you stop outsourcing your attention, that you stop making other people more interesting or more important than yourself, that you bring your curiosity, your care, your mental energy back to your own inner life. Now, I want to be clear about something. This doesn't mean you become self-absorbed or narcissistic. It doesn't mean you stop caring about others or thinking about them entirely. It means you develop balance. You give yourself as much attention as you give others. You think about your own needs as much as you think about theirs. For many people, especially people who've spent their whole lives focused on others, this feels revolutionary. And it also feels selfish. The conditioning runs so deep that even thinking about yourself feels wrong, feels like you're abandoning others, feels like you're being a bad person. But Jung would tell you that you can't genuinely care for others when you're not caring for yourself. You can't be truly present with someone when you're constantly abandoning yourself. You can't offer real love when you're not loving yourself enough to pay attention to your own inner life. The kind of thinking about others that depletes you, that exhausts you, that keeps you up at night, that's not love, that's anxiety, that's control, that's projection. And it doesn't serve you or them. Real care for others comes from overflow. It comes from having a full enough inner life, a strong enough sense of self, that you can be with them without losing yourself, that you can love them without needing them to be anything other than what they are. But to get to that place, you have to do the work of coming back to yourself. You have to practice thinking about yourself. You have to learn to ask yourself the questions you've been asking about everyone else. What do I need right now? What am I feeling? What do I want? What's important to me? What do I value? What brings me alive? What am I avoiding? What am I afraid of? These questions, when you really sit with them, when you give them the same attention you've been giving to thoughts about others, these questions lead you home. They lead you back to the self. They help you discover who you are. And discovering who you are changes everything. Because when you know yourself, when you're grounded in your own sense of identity and worth, you stop needing constant validation from others. You stop needing to control how they see you. You stop needing to think about them constantly because you're secure enough in yourself to let them be who they are. This is the paradox Jung understood. The less you think about others, the better your relationships become, because you're relating to them from a place of wholeness instead of from a place of need. You're with them because you choose to be, not because you need them to complete you or define you or validate you. But getting there requires breaking the habit of obsessive thinking about others. And habits, especially ones this deep, don't break easily. They require awareness and practice and patience with yourself. So let's talk about what the practice actually looks like. Because understanding intellectually that you shouldn't think too much about anyone is one thing. Actually changing the pattern is another. The practice starts with noticing. Every time you find yourself thinking about someone else, just notice it. Don't judge it. Don't try to stop it forcefully. Just notice. Oh, I'm thinking about them again. I'm wondering what they're thinking about me. I'm replaying that conversation. I'm trying to figure out what they meant. Just notice. And in that noticing, you're already creating a little bit of space. You're no longer completely identified with the thought. You're observing it. And that observation, that awareness, that's the beginning of freedom. Then, gently, redirect. Bring your attention back to yourself. What am I feeling right now? What's happening in my body? What do I need in this moment? At first, this will feel mechanical. It will feel like you're going through the motions. Your mind will want to go right back to thinking about the other person. And it will. Again and again. That's normal. That's how habits work. But each time you notice and redirect, you're creating a new neural pathway. You're teaching your mind that there's another option besides obsessive thinking about others. You're practicing coming back to yourself. Over time, with repetition, this gets easier. The noticing happens faster. The redirecting becomes more natural. You start to catch yourself earlier in the cycle of obsessive thinking. And sometimes, you don't even go down that path at all because you've become more aware of the choice. Jung would also say that it helps to understand what the obsessive thinking is trying to do for you. What need is it meeting? What purpose is it serving? For some people, thinking about others is a way of feeling connected. If they're in your thoughts, you feel less alone. For others, it's a way of feeling in control. If you can figure them out, predict them, understand them perfectly, maybe you can control the outcome. For others still, thinking about someone is a way of avoiding grief. As long as you're thinking about them, imagining conversations with them, holding on to hope about them, you don't have to face the reality that the relationship is over or that they're not capable of what you need. Whatever the obsessive thinking is doing for you, there's probably a legitimate need underneath it. A need for connection or control or comfort or hope, and that need deserves attention. But thinking obsessively about someone else isn't actually meeting that need. It's just creating the illusion that the need is being met. Real connection comes from being present with people, not from thinking about them when they're not there. Real control comes from managing your own reactions and choices, not from trying to control others through mental focus. Real comfort comes from being with yourself compassionately, not from filling your mind with someone else. So part of the practice is learning to meet your own needs directly, instead of trying to meet them through obsessive thinking about others. If you're lonely, reach out. If you need connection, be present with someone. If you need comfort, comfort yourself. If you need control, focus on what's actually in your control, which is your own thoughts and actions, not theirs. This is hard work. It requires you to face the reality of your situation instead of living in the fantasy that constant thinking about someone creates. It requires you to feel your feelings instead of avoiding them through mental loops about other people. But Jung believed this kind of honesty, this kind of direct engagement with reality, is what allows the psyche to heal and grow. You can't heal in fantasy. You can't grow while you're avoiding yourself. You have to be willing to be real, to be present, to face what's actually there. And what's actually there, when you stop thinking so much about others and turn toward yourself, is usually a mix of things. Some beautiful, some painful, some confusing, some clear. But all of it is yours. All of it is real. All of it deserves your attention. Your joy deserves your attention. Your grief deserves your attention. Your anger deserves your attention. Your longing deserves your attention. Not their approval, not their validation, not their understanding, yours. You are the one who needs to see yourself. You are the one who needs to validate your experience. You are the one who needs to be present with your own life. And you can't do that while you're giving all your mental energy to someone else. You have to bring it back. You have to reclaim your attention. You have to choose yourself. This is what Jung meant when he talked about the relationship with the self being the most important relationship. Not because you should be selfish or isolated, but because if you don't have a relationship with yourself, if you don't know yourself, if you're not present with yourself, you can't really be present with anyone else. You'll just be projecting. You'll just be thinking about them constantly. You'll just be giving your power away while wondering why you feel so exhausted and empty. So tonight, as you continue to rest, I want you to practice being with yourself. Notice when your mind wants to go to someone else, and gently, kindly, bring it back to you. back to your breath, back to your body, back to what you're feeling right now. It's okay if this feels uncomfortable at first. It's okay if you don't know what you feel. It's okay if being with yourself brings up sadness or loneliness or fear. Those feelings are allowed. They're part of being human, and they need your compassion, not your avoidance. The practice is just to be here, to be present with yourself, to stop thinking about them and start feeling yourself. Your own aliveness, your own existence, your own worth that doesn't depend on what they think or do. You matter. Not because of how well you understand others, not because of how much you think about them, but because you exist, because you're here, because you're a human being worthy of your own attention and care. Let that sink in tonight. Let yourself begin to believe it. You don't have to earn your own attention. You don't have to be perfect to deserve your own care. You just have to be willing to be here with yourself. That's enough. That's everything, actually. Just rest now. Just breathe. Just be with yourself for a while. The thoughts about others can wait. Tonight, you're here with you. And that's exactly where you need to be. Let me tell you something else that Jung understood about thinking too much about others. He understood that there are different kinds of thinking, and not all of them are equal. Some thinking is productive, some is destructive, and most of the thinking we do about other people falls into the destructive category. Productive thinking is when you're solving a problem, making a plan, understanding something new, or processing an experience. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It leads somewhere. It resolves something. You think about it, you work it through, and then you move on. But obsessive thinking about other people isn't like that. It doesn't resolve. It doesn't lead anywhere. It just loops. You think the same thoughts over and over. You replay the same conversations. You wonder about the same things. You come to the same non-conclusions. And then you do it all again. Jung would call this rumination. And rumination, he understood, isn't actually thinking. It's more like a mental compulsion, a groove your mind falls into, a pattern that repeats because it's familiar, not because it's useful. And rumination about other people specifically is almost always rooted in anxiety. You're anxious about what they think of you. You're anxious about whether they'll reject you. You're anxious about misunderstanding them or being misunderstood. You're anxious about losing them or not having them or not being enough for them. So your mind tries to solve the anxiety through thinking. If I just think about it enough, if I just analyze it from every angle, if I just figure out exactly what happened and what it means, then I'll feel better, then I'll know what to do, then I'll be safe. But it doesn't work that way, because the anxiety isn't actually about them. The anxiety is about you, about your own insecurity, your own fear of rejection, your own uncertainty about your worth, and you can't solve that through thinking about someone else. You can only address it by turning toward yourself, by working with your own anxiety directly, by building a stronger sense of self that doesn't depend so much on what others think or do. This is difficult to accept because we're so used to believing that if we're anxious about a relationship, the solution must involve the other person. We need them to reassure us. We need them to clarify what they meant. We need them to prove they care. We need them to change their behavior. But Jung would say that needing all that from them is part of the problem. It means you're giving them power over your internal state. It means you can't be okay unless they do or say the right thing. And that's an impossible situation, because you can't control them. You can only control yourself. So the work isn't to think more about them. The work is to develop enough internal security that you don't need constant reassurance, that you can tolerate uncertainty, that you can be with your anxiety without needing to make it go away through obsessive thinking. And developing that internal security starts with recognizing when you're ruminating versus when you're actually thinking productively. Start noticing the quality of your thoughts about others. Are these thoughts going anywhere? Are they helping me understand something new? Are they leading to a decision or an action? Or am I just repeating the same loop I've been in for days or weeks or months? If it's the latter, if you recognize you're ruminating, then the most helpful thing you can do is stop, not by forcing the thoughts away, but by gently redirecting your attention to something else. To your breath, to your body, to the present moment, to something you can actually control. Jung believed that the psyche has a natural wisdom. If you stop feeding the rumination, if you stop engaging with the obsessive thoughts, eventually they lose their power. They quiet down. They release their grip, not immediately, but over time. But if you keep engaging with them, if you keep following every thought about the other person down the rabbit hole, you're reinforcing the pattern. You're training your mind that this is what we do. We think about them. We worry about them. We try to figure them out, and the pattern gets stronger. Breaking that pattern requires discipline. Not harsh discipline, but gentle, consistent redirection. Over and over. Every time you catch yourself ruminating, you bring your attention back. Back to yourself. Back to now. Back to what's actually in front of you. And here's something important that Jung understood. When you stop thinking so much about others, you create space. Space in your mind. Space in your psyche. Space in your life. And that space, initially, might feel uncomfortable. It might even feel empty or boring or lonely because you've been filling that space with thoughts about others for so long, maybe for your whole life. And now there's just space, just quiet, just you with yourself. And if you're not used to that, it can be unsettling. But Jung would tell you not to fill that space too quickly. Not to immediately find someone else to think about or some other distraction to occupy your mind. Instead, let the space be there. Sit with it. Be curious about it. See what emerges when you're not constantly filling your mind with thoughts about other people. What emerges is often surprising. Creative ideas you didn't have time for before. Feelings you've been avoiding. Clarity about what you actually want. Energy you didn't know you had. A sense of yourself that was buried under all the mental noise about others. This space, this emptiness that comes when you stop obsessing about other people, this is actually fertile ground. Jung would call it the void. And the void, in his understanding, isn't empty in a bad way. It's empty in a full of possibility way. It's the place from which something new can emerge. But you have to be willing to be with it. To not immediately rush to fill it, to trust that the discomfort of the space is temporary and that something valuable lives on the other side of it. For many people, this is the hardest part, sitting with the emptiness, being with themselves, without the distraction of obsessive thoughts about others. It brings up all the feelings that the obsessive thinking was helping them avoid: the loneliness, the fear, the grief, the anger, the shame. All of it comes up when you stop using thoughts about others as a buffer, and that's painful, but it's also necessary, because those feelings need to be felt. They need attention. They need to move through you, instead of being held at bay by constant mental loops about someone else. Jung believed that unfelt feelings create symptoms. They create anxiety. They create obsessive thoughts. They create patterns that keep you stuck. But when you're willing to feel them, when you're willing to be with them instead of avoiding them, they gradually release their hold on you. So part of not thinking too much about others is being willing to feel more, to feel your own feelings, instead of staying in your head trying to figure out theirs. To be present with your own experience instead of constantly projecting onto someone else. This is vulnerable work. It's tender work. It requires you to be with yourself in ways you might not be used to. But Jung would say, this is the work that actually heals. This is the work that actually sets you free. Now, let's talk about something practical. Because I don't want you to think this is only about inner work and feeling feelings. There's also a practical component to not thinking too much about others. When you think about someone constantly, you're often rehearsing. You're rehearsing what you'll say to them. You're rehearsing how you'll respond if they say this or that. You're playing out future scenarios in your mind, and you think you're preparing yourself, making yourself ready for the actual interaction. But Jung would tell you that all this rehearsal actually makes you less present when you're actually with the person, because you're not listening to what they're actually saying. You're listening for the thing you rehearsed a response to. You're not seeing who they actually are in this moment. You're seeing the version of them you've been imagining. So all that thinking about them, all that mental preparation, it doesn't help. It actually gets in the way of real connection. Because real connection happens in the present moment. It happens when you're both present, both authentic, both responding to what's actually happening rather than to what you imagined would happen. This means that thinking less about someone might actually improve your interactions with them. When you show up without all the rehearsal, without all the mental preparation, you're more available to actually meet them, to see them, to respond authentically, instead of from a script you've been running in your head. This is counterintuitive. We think we need to think about people to maintain connection with them. But Jung understood that real connection happens when we're not in our heads, when we're present, when we're responsive to what's actually happening rather than to our projections and rehearsals and anxieties. So part of not thinking too much about others is trusting yourself to be present when you're actually with them. Trusting that you don't need to have everything figured out in advance. Trusting that you can respond in the moment to whatever actually happens. And building that trust requires experience. It requires practicing showing up without the mental preparation, without the rehearsal, without having spent hours thinking about them beforehand, and discovering that it's actually okay, that you can handle whatever happens, that you're more capable in the moment than you thought you were. This is scary at first, because we use all that thinking as a security blanket. We think it makes us safe. But Jung would say it's a false sense of security. Real security comes from trusting yourself, from knowing you can handle things as they arise, from being grounded in yourself regardless of what others do or say. And you can't build that trust while you're giving all your power away to thoughts about other people. You have to practice coming back to yourself. Practice trusting yourself. Practice being present without the mental preparation. Let me tell you something else about what happens when you stop thinking so much about others. You start to see them more clearly. Not the version of them you've constructed in your mind, not your projection, but who they actually are. Because when you're not constantly thinking about someone, when you're not constantly analyzing them or trying to figure them out, you become more available to simply observe, to notice, to see what's actually there instead of what you're looking for or afraid of or hoping for. And sometimes what you see surprises you. Sometimes you realize they're not who you thought they were. Sometimes you realize the relationship isn't what you thought it was. Sometimes you realize you've been in love with or afraid of, or trying to please a version of them that only existed in your mind. This can be disorienting, but it's also liberating, because it means you can start relating to the actual person instead of to your projection of them. And relating to the actual person, whoever they are, is more honest, more real, more grounded in truth, even if the truth is that they're not capable of what you need. Even if the truth is that the relationship isn't healthy. Even if the truth is that you need to let go. At least you're working with reality instead of with fantasy. Jung spent a lot of time helping people distinguish between their projections and reality. He understood how much suffering comes from being in relationship with our projections instead of with actual people. And he knew that withdrawing projections, seeing clearly, is one of the most difficult and most important parts of psychological work. When you stop thinking so much about someone, you're beginning to withdraw your projections. You're beginning to see more clearly, and that clarity, even when it's uncomfortable, is valuable. Because you can't make good decisions based on projections. You can only make good decisions based on reality. So tonight, as you continue to rest, I want you to consider what might become clear if you stopped thinking so much about the people in your life. What would you see if you weren't looking through the lens of your projections and anxieties and hopes? maybe you'd see that they're doing the best they can with what they have. Maybe you'd see that they're not capable of what you need. Maybe you'd see that they care about you in their own way, even if it doesn't look like what you wanted. Maybe you'd see that you're holding on to something that ended long ago. Whatever you'd see, it's probably closer to the truth than what you're seeing now through all the thoughts and projections and mental loops. And seeing the truth, working with reality, that's what allows you to move forward, to make real choices, to build a life based on what actually is, instead of on what you wish were true. This is hard work. Jung knew it was hard, but he also knew it was necessary, that we can't become who we're meant to be while we're living in fantasy. While we're giving all our mental energy to projections of other people, while we're avoiding ourselves through obsessive thinking about someone else, we have to come back to reality, back to ourselves, back to what's actually true and present and here. And when we do, when we stop thinking so much about others and start being present with ourselves, everything begins to shift. The anxiety lessens because we're not constantly spinning in mental loops. The relationships improve because we're more present and less needy. The sense of self strengthens because we're actually paying attention to ourselves for once. And gradually, we discover that we don't need to think about others constantly to stay connected, that we don't need to figure them out perfectly to be okay, that we can let them be who they are, and we can be who we are. And there can be connection without the enmeshment and the obsessive thinking. This is what Jung meant by differentiation. Two separate people, each with their own inner life, each capable of being with themselves, choosing to be in relationship not because they need each other to feel complete, but because they enjoy each other's company, because they value each other, because the relationship enhances their lives without consuming them. That's the kind of relating that becomes possible when you stop thinking too much about anyone, when you bring your attention back to yourself, when you develop your own center, your own ground, your own sense of who you are independent of what others think or do. Tonight, you're practicing that. You're practicing being with yourself, letting thoughts about others arise and then letting them go, not engaging with them, not following them down the rabbit hole. Just noticing them and returning to yourself. Keep practicing, keep redirecting, keep coming back to the breath, to the body, to this moment, to yourself. You're learning something important. You're learning that you can be with yourself, that you don't need to fill every moment with thoughts about others, that there's something valuable, something real, something solid right here in your own presence. That's what Jung wanted you to discover, the treasure that's been waiting all along beneath the constant thinking about others, the self, your true nature, the part of you that's whole and always has been. It's here. It's been here all along. You just have to stop thinking about them long enough to notice it. Let yourself rest now. Let yourself be here. Let yourself stop figuring everyone else out and just be with the mystery of your own existence. That's enough for tonight. That's everything, actually. Just rest. Just breathe. Just be. There's something Jung said that might seem harsh at first, but it holds profound truth. He said that most of what we call love is actually a demand for the other person to complete us, to fill our emptiness, to make us feel whole. And when we're thinking about someone constantly, obsessively, we're usually engaged in that demand. We're not thinking about them because we love them in a mature, differentiated way. We're thinking about them because we need something from them. We need them to validate us. We need them to prove we're worthy. We need them to fill a void inside us that we don't know how to fill ourselves. And this, Jung would say, this isn't love, it's dependence. It's projection. It's the psyche seeking wholeness outside itself instead of doing the work to become whole from within. Real love, mature love, the kind of love Jung believed was possible after you've done the work of individuation. Real love doesn't require constant thinking about the other person. It doesn't require obsessive focus. It doesn't require figuring them out or controlling them or merging with them. Real love is spacious. It allows the other person to be who they are. It doesn't need them to be anything other than what they are. It can hold them lightly instead of gripping them tightly. And it can do this because it comes from a place of inner fullness rather than inner emptiness. But most of us weren't taught this kind of love. We were taught that love means constant attention. That love means making someone the center of your universe. That love means thinking about them all the time. That if you're not obsessed, you must not really care. So we learn to equate obsession with love. We learn to measure how much we love someone by how much mental space they occupy. And we end up exhausted, depleted, anxious, because we're trying to maintain this level of focus that isn't sustainable and isn't actually love. Jung would invite you to question this equation. To ask yourself, is thinking about someone constantly really love? Or is it need? Is it fear? Is it an attempt to control something you can't control? Is it a way of avoiding your own work? These are difficult questions. Because if you've spent your whole life believing that your obsessive thinking about others is evidence of how much you care, letting go of that can feel like letting go of love itself. Like if you stop thinking about them so much, you'll stop caring. You'll become cold or indifferent or disconnected. But Jung understood that the opposite is true. When you stop thinking about someone obsessively, when you withdraw your need for them to complete you, when you develop your own sense of wholeness, you become more capable of real love, of seeing them, of appreciating them, of being with them without needing them to be different. This is paradoxical. You have to let go to truly connect. You have to stop needing them so much in order to love them well. You have to fill yourself up so you can relate to them from overflow instead of from emptiness. And filling yourself up doesn't mean becoming perfect or enlightened or having all your issues resolved. It means being present with yourself. It means knowing yourself. It means having a relationship with your own inner life that's rich enough, full enough, that you're not constantly looking to others to provide what's missing. This is the work of individuation. This is what Jung spent his life helping people understand. That you can't skip over yourself to get to real relationship with others. You have to do the work of becoming a self first, of knowing who you are, of being with yourself, of filling your own cup. And when your cup is full, when you're grounded in yourself, you don't need to think about others constantly. You can be with them when you're with them. You can think about them sometimes when you're apart, but it's not this desperate, anxious, obsessive thing. It's just natural connection between two whole people. Now, let me be clear about something. When I say don't think too much about anyone, I'm not saying don't care. I'm not saying be cold or distant or avoidant. I'm saying care from a place of wholeness instead of from a place of need. The difference is profound. When you care from wholeness, you can be present with someone's pain without trying to fix it. You can witness their journey without trying to control it. You can love them without needing them to love you back in a specific way. But when you care from need, everything becomes desperate. You have to fix their pain because their pain makes you uncomfortable. You have to control their journey because their choices affect how you feel about yourself. You have to make them love you the way you want because without it, you feel incomplete. This kind of caring, this desperate caring that comes from need, this is what drives obsessive thinking. Because if you need them that much, you have to think about them constantly. You have to monitor them. You have to try to understand them perfectly so you can get what you need from them. But Jung would tell you that you're never going to get what you need from them, not because they're bad people or because they don't care, but because what you need, what you're really looking for, it can only come from within. It can only come from doing your own work, from becoming your own person, from filling your own emptiness instead of asking them to fill it. This is difficult to accept because it means taking responsibility for yourself. It means acknowledging that all the thinking about them, all the obsessing, all the trying to figure them out, it's not actually about them. It's about you. about what you need to develop in yourself. And that's harder work than thinking about someone else. It's harder to face yourself than to focus on them. It's harder to feel your own emptiness than to try to get them to fill it. It's harder to become whole than to remain dependent. But it's the only way forward, the only way to freedom, the only way to real relationship. Jung believed that the second half of life is about this work, about turning inward, about developing the parts of yourself that were neglected in the first half, about becoming whole instead of remaining fragmented. And for many people, especially people who spent the first half of their life focused on others, pleasing others, thinking about others, the second half requires a radical redirection, a turning away from constant focus on others and a turning toward the self. This doesn't mean you become isolated or self-absorbed. It means you develop balance. It means you give yourself as much attention as you've been giving others. It means you think about your own needs and wants and feelings with the same care you've been thinking about everyone else's. And this feels revolutionary. It feels selfish. It feels wrong. Because everything you were taught said that good people focus on others, that loving people think about others constantly. That caring means self-sacrifice. But Jung would challenge all of that. He would say that you can't truly give to others what you haven't given to yourself. You can't offer presence if you're not present with yourself. You can't offer love if you don't love yourself. You can't offer acceptance if you haven't accepted yourself. So the work of not thinking so much about others is really the work of thinking more about yourself, of turning your attention inward, of asking yourself the questions you've been asking about everyone else. What do I feel right now? What do I need? What do I want? What's important to me? What am I afraid of? What am I avoiding? What would make my life meaningful? These questions, when you really sit with them, when you give them time and attention and curiosity, these questions lead you home. They lead you to yourself, to the self that Jung talked about, the self that's been waiting all along for you to turn toward it. And the self, in Jung's understanding, isn't something you have to create. It's already there. It's always been there. You just have to stop filling your consciousness with thoughts about others long enough to notice it, to feel it, to connect with it. This is what meditation traditions have been teaching for thousands of years. This is what depth psychology is about. This is what spiritual practice points toward. The discovery that what you've been seeking outside yourself is actually inside. That the wholeness you're looking for doesn't come from another person. It comes from connection with your own depths. But you can't make that connection while you're constantly thinking about someone else. You have to create space. You have to turn inward. You have to be willing to be with yourself, to sit with yourself, to meet yourself. And meeting yourself, really meeting yourself for maybe the first time, can be intense. Because you're not who you thought you were. You're not the collection of roles and performances and adaptations you've been presenting to the world. Underneath all of that is something else. Something more real. Something that's been waiting to be seen. Jung called this the true self. And he believed that discovering it, relating to it, living from it, this is the task of a lifetime. This is what makes life meaningful. This is what allows us to die having lived our own life instead of the life others wanted us to live. But we can't live our own life while we're giving all our mental energy to others, while we're constantly thinking about them and trying to figure them out and managing their perception of us. That's living their life, not ours. Living our own life requires that we stop, that we redirect, that we choose ourselves even when it feels selfish, that we think about ourselves as much as we think about them. And when we do, when we finally give ourselves that attention, that care, that focus, something begins to shift. We start to feel more solid, more grounded, more capable of being in relationship without losing ourselves. We also start to see which relationships are actually healthy and which ones only worked because we were giving everything and asking for nothing. Which people can handle us being a whole person, and which ones need us to stay small and focused on them. This can be painful, because some relationships don't survive your individuation. Some people don't want you to stop thinking about them constantly. They want you to remain focused on them, managing them, accommodating them. And when you withdraw that focus, when you start paying attention to yourself, they might leave, or get angry, or try to pull you back into the old pattern. Jung understood this. He knew that becoming yourself sometimes means losing people, that not everyone can handle you being differentiated, that some relationships were built on your self-abandonment and can't survive your self-reclamation. But he also knew that this is part of the process, that you can't become whole while maintaining relationships that require you to stay fragmented, that sometimes you have to let go of who wants you to be less so you can become who you actually are. This is grief, real grief. Grieving the relationships that can't survive your growth. Grieving the version of yourself who thought constant focus on others was love. Grieving the fantasy that if you just thought about them enough, figured them out perfectly, they'd finally give you what you need. That grief deserves space. It deserves recognition. But it doesn't mean you should go back. It doesn't mean you should return to obsessive thinking about others. It means you're growing, you're changing, you're becoming yourself. And that always involves loss. But what you gain is so much more than what you lose. You gain yourself. You gain your life. You gain the ability to be present. You gain relationships based on reality, instead of on need and projection and fantasy. You gain freedom. Freedom from the exhausting pattern of thinking about everyone else all the time. Freedom from the anxiety of trying to control what others think of you. Freedom from the need for constant validation from outside yourself. This freedom isn't easy to claim. It requires courage. It requires you to disappoint people who want you to stay focused on them. It requires you to sit with the discomfort of being with yourself. It requires you to feel the feelings you've been avoiding through obsessive thinking about others. But Jung believed it's worth it. That freedom is worth the discomfort. That becoming yourself is worth the grief. That living your own life is worth disappointing people who want you to live theirs. Tonight, as you continue to rest, I want you to imagine what that freedom might feel like. What would it be like to wake up tomorrow and not immediately start thinking about someone else? What would it be like to go through your day focused on your own experience instead of constantly wondering what others are thinking about you? What would it be like to be in a conversation fully present instead of in your head rehearsing what you'll say next? What would it be like to make decisions based on what you want instead of what you think others expect? What would it be like to go to bed at night and just be with yourself instead of spinning in mental loops about someone else? That's the freedom Jung is pointing toward. That's what becomes possible when you stop thinking too much about anyone, when you bring your attention back to yourself, when you choose to be with yourself instead of being lost in thoughts about others. It's possible, it's available. It starts tonight with this practice of noticing and redirecting, of being with yourself, of choosing yourself. Keep practicing, keep redirecting, keep coming home to yourself. That's where the real work is. That's where the real life is. That's where freedom lives. Just rest now. Just be here. Just let yourself stop trying to figure anyone out and simply be present with your own existence. You're doing the work. You're choosing yourself. And that's everything. Just breathe. Just rest. Just be. As we come to the deeper part of the night, I want to tell you something that Jung understood about what happens when you finally stop thinking so much about others. Something beautiful. Something that makes all this work worth doing. When you stop giving all your mental energy to other people, when you finally bring your attention home to yourself, you discover something remarkable. You discover that you've always been enough. That you didn't need their validation or approval or understanding to be whole, that the wholeness was here all along, just waiting for you to notice it. This is what Jung meant when he talked about the self. Not the ego self, Not the self that's built from others' opinions and your own adaptations, but the self with a capital S, the deep self, the true nature that's been here since you were born and will be here until you die. That self doesn't need anyone else to complete it. It doesn't need constant thinking about others to feel connected. It doesn't need to figure everyone out to feel safe. It's already whole. It's always been whole. And when you finally stop the constant mental noise about others, when you create enough inner quiet, you start to sense that wholeness. You start to feel it, not as an idea, not as a concept, but as a living reality, as something true and solid and here. This is what all the work has been leading toward. All the noticing, all the redirecting, all the choosing yourself over and over. It's been leading you home, home to yourself, home to the self that doesn't need anything from anyone else to be complete. And from that place, from that grounded sense of wholeness, your relationships transform. Because you're no longer relating from need. You're no longer demanding that others complete you. You're relating from fullness, from choice, from genuine care instead of from desperate grasping. People feel this difference. They feel when you're with them from wholeness instead of from need. They feel when you're present instead of in your head thinking about them. They feel when you see them clearly instead of projecting onto them. And often, paradoxically, when you stop needing them so much, when you stop thinking about them constantly, they become more interested, more available, more genuine, because they're no longer dealing with your projections and your needs and your constant mental focus. They're dealing with you, the real you, the person who's whole enough to be present. But even if that doesn't happen, even if some people drift away when you stop thinking about them constantly, you're okay, because you have yourself. Because you've discovered that the wholeness you were seeking through them has always been available within you. This is the gift Jung wanted you to find. The recognition that you are enough, that you've always been enough, that all the thinking about others was just a detour, a distraction, a way of avoiding the simple truth that you are already whole. Tonight, as you sink deeper into rest, I want you to let that truth begin to settle. Let yourself feel, even just a little bit, that you might be enough exactly as you are. That you don't need to figure anyone out to be okay. That you don't need anyone else's approval to be worthy. That you can just be here, being yourself, and that's enough. This might feel strange at first. You might not believe it yet. That's okay. You don't have to believe it fully tonight. You just have to be willing to consider it, to try it on, to see what it feels like to rest in the possibility that you're already whole. And as you rest in that possibility, as you let yourself be here without trying to figure anyone out or manage anyone's perception of you, something begins to soften. The anxiety lessens. The mental loops quiet down. The desperate quality of your thinking about others starts to release, because you're not desperate anymore. You're not lacking. You're not incomplete. You're here. You're whole. You're enough. This is what Jung spent his life trying to help people see. That the treasure they're seeking outside themselves, in relationships, in others' approval, in constant thinking about other people, that treasure is actually inside. It's been inside all along. They just needed to stop looking outside long enough to notice it. And you're noticing it now. You're feeling it. You're beginning to come home to yourself in a way that maybe you never have before. And it's changing everything. The way you think about relationships is changing. The way you think about yourself is changing. The way you move through the world is changing. Because you're no longer giving your power away. You're no longer living in your head, constantly thinking about what others think of you. You're here, present, grounded, whole. And from this place, you can love people without needing them. You can care about them without obsessing over them. You can be in relationship without losing yourself. You can think about them sometimes, when it's natural, when it serves connection, but not constantly, not desperately, not as a way of avoiding yourself. This is mature love. This is differentiated relating. This is what becomes possible when you do the work Jung is asking you to do. the work of not thinking too much about anyone, the work of bringing your attention home to yourself. Now, I want to acknowledge something. This work isn't finished. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and never think obsessively about anyone again. The pattern runs deep. It's been with you for years, maybe for your whole life. It's going to take time to change. You're going to forget. You're going to find yourself right back in the mental loop about someone, spinning in the same old patterns. And that's okay. That's part of the process. The work isn't to be perfect. The work is to notice and redirect, over and over, with patience, with compassion. Every time you notice, every time you redirect, you're strengthening a new pathway. You're teaching your mind that there's another option. You're building the capacity to be with yourself instead of being lost in thoughts about others. And gradually, over time, the new pattern becomes stronger than the old one. The redirection becomes automatic. The presence with yourself becomes natural. And you find that days go by where you're just living your life, being present, not caught up in obsessive thinking about anyone. That's the goal. Not perfection, not never thinking about others, but freedom from the compulsive quality of it, freedom from the desperation, freedom from the need to figure everyone out in order to feel okay. Jung would tell you to be patient with this process, to have compassion for yourself when you fall back into old patterns, to recognize that changing deep psychological patterns takes time and repeated effort, to celebrate the small victories instead of focusing on the setbacks. Every moment you choose to redirect your attention from someone else back to yourself is a victory. Every time you notice you're ruminating and choose to be present instead is growth. Every time you sit with your own feelings, instead of avoiding them through thoughts about others, is healing. These moments add up, these choices accumulate, and over time, they lead to real transformation, to a different way of being in the world, to a different kind of relationship with yourself and others. And that transformation, that's what makes this work worth doing. Not just because it will improve your relationships, though it will. Not just because it will reduce your anxiety, though it will, but because it will allow you to live your own life, to be present in your own experience, to know yourself, to develop your own sense of meaning and purpose that doesn't depend on what others think, to become who you actually are instead of who you've been trying to be to earn others' approval. This is individuation. This is becoming yourself. And it requires that you stop thinking so much about everyone else, that you bring your focus home, that you choose yourself over and over until choosing yourself becomes natural. Tonight is part of that process. This practice of resting with yourself, of letting thoughts about others arise and letting them go, of redirecting your attention back to your own breath, your own body, your own presence. You're doing it. You're choosing yourself. And every time you do, you're building the life Jung believed was possible for you. A life lived from the inside out. A life grounded in your own wholeness. A life free from the exhausting pattern of constant mental focus on others. As you drift deeper into sleep now, I want you to know that this work continues even when you're not conscious. Your psyche is integrating what you've learned. It's creating new patterns. It's moving toward wholeness in ways you can't see or control. Jung believed the unconscious is wise, that it knows what you need, that it's always working toward your healing and growth, even when you're asleep. So trust the process. Trust that this work you're doing is taking root. Trust that you're changing in ways that will become clear over time. And when you wake up tomorrow, you might notice something different. Maybe you wake up thinking about yourself instead of immediately thinking about someone else. Maybe you feel a little more grounded, a little more present. Maybe the obsessive thoughts about others have a little less grip. Or maybe everything feels the same and you wonder if any of this is working. That's okay too. Change doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's happening beneath the surface, quietly, steadily, and you only notice it when you look back weeks or months from now and realize you're different than you were. So be patient. Keep practicing. Keep noticing and redirecting. Keep choosing yourself. Trust that you're moving in the right direction, even when you can't see the progress. And remember what Jung understood, that you're not trying to become someone you're not. You're not trying to create wholeness where there is none. You're simply remembering what's always been true, that you're already whole, that you're already enough, that you don't need to think about anyone constantly to be complete. The work is just removing the obstacles to seeing that truth. The obstacles of conditioning and habit, and the belief that wholeness comes from outside yourself. As you remove those obstacles, as you stop giving all your mental energy to others, the truth of your wholeness naturally emerges. It's been here all along. You've just been too busy thinking about everyone else to notice it. But you're noticing now. You're coming home to yourself, and that's everything. So let yourself rest deeply tonight. Let yourself release the need to figure anyone out. Let yourself stop trying to control what others think. Let yourself just be here, whole and complete, exactly as you are. You don't need anything from anyone else to be okay. You're okay right now, in this moment, just as you are. And when you wake up tomorrow, you'll still be okay. And the day after that. And the day after that. Because your okayness doesn't depend on them. It depends on you, on your willingness to be with yourself, to know yourself, to choose yourself. And you're doing that. You're doing it right now. And it's changing everything. Jung would see what you're doing. He would recognize the courage it takes to turn away from the familiar pattern of thinking about others and turn toward yourself. He would honor the difficulty of this work and the importance of it. And he would tell you what I'm telling you now. You're going to be okay, more than okay. You're going to discover that when you stop thinking so much about anyone, when you finally bring your attention home to yourself, you find what you've been looking for all along, not in them, in you. In the self that's always been whole, always been here, always been enough. Let yourself rest in that truth tonight. Let it hold you as you drift into sleep. Let yourself trust that you are enough. You've always been enough. And you don't need to think about anyone constantly to prove it or maintain it or earn it. You're enough, right now. Just as you are. Just being here, just breathing, just existing. That's the truth Jung spent his life helping people see. And now, you're seeing it too. Just rest now. Just let go. Just be. Everything else will take care of itself. You don't have to think about anyone tonight. You can just be here with yourself. And that's not lonely. That's not empty. That's coming home. Sleep well. Sleep deeply. Sleep knowing that you're whole. If this helped you tonight, if you're beginning to see that thinking less about others might give you back to yourself, share your experience in the comments below. Not for me, for others who need to know this is possible. And if you'd like more meditations on Jung's wisdom, on becoming yourself, on living from wholeness instead of from need, consider subscribing for weekly teachings that help you come home to yourself. But for now, just rest. Just sleep, just be. You're exactly where you need to be. You're enough. You've always been enough. Sleep well.